All right. Hello once again, students. I'm back here with another web presentation. Today I'm going to be discussing David Christian once again, an article of his called Inner Eurasia as a Unit of World History. As I mentioned before, I'll say a little bit just for the sake of consistency about David Christian. He's a world historian, a famous world historian, born in Brooklyn, New York, had British and American parents, and spent his childhood traveling all over the world, living in various places. Went to Oxford University as an undergraduate student, studied history, and went to the University of Western Ontario. It's called Western University today, where he studied Russian history. Returned to Oxford, where he completed his PhD in Russian history, Russian 19th to 20th century Russian and Soviet history. And has taught for the better part of his career at Macquarie University, which is in Sydney, Australia. Taught there from 75 to 2000, and then again later returned to Macquarie, where he's now the distinguished professor. As he explains his own kind of intellectual development as a professor at Macquarie University, he was somebody who continued to read very broadly and began to develop a kind of interest in placing human history in these much larger frameworks. This led him, in some ways, to sort of do the work that he does in this article, as well as to pioneer ultimately what he calls big history, which is a movement that puts human history in cosmic and geological kinds of frameworks. In fact, I know one of the great big history classes that's out there is like a world history course, but it doesn't have human beings in the class until like week 7 or 8 of the 15-week semester. So kind of interesting and different. This article was published in the Journal of World History in 1994. So just to kind of situate it or contextualize it, right? It's published in the years immediately after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. And this was connected to work that he was doing on Russia during this period of time, studying the steppe and forest peoples of Inner Eurasia. He published his book on Russia and Central Asia and Mongolia in 1998, so just a few years later. This article, as with the previous one, was published in the Journal of World History, which is a very important journal for world history, which, as it states, its goal to present analyses from a global point of view, focusing on forces that cross boundaries between cultures and civilizations, and that's definitely the case here. So the scope here, once again, to sort of point this out, is the breakup of the Soviet Union happens in 1991. And this had the effect of sort of devaluing a lot of the old units of analysis for world history, like, for example, the nation state. So, being a Russian historian and kind of thinking about the way things used to be and the way that people used to think about them, Professor Christian developed this proposal, if you will, to try and point out a previously unrecognized unit of world history, which he calls Inner Eurasia. So let me tell you a little bit about the thesis for this article. According to David Christian, Inner Eurasia, which includes lands ruled by the Soviet Union in 1990, together with Mongolia, and as he says more hesitantly, parts of China's most western region, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Province. Inner Eurasia makes a suitable unit, a large unit rather, of analysis for world history that's based on geography rather than on politics, as the nation state might. And that contrasts with Outer Eurasia, which includes the rest of the Eurasian landmass, so the edges of the Eurasian landmass. As Christian explains, the southern region of Inner Eurasia is defined by mountains that form a natural border, while in the north, the tundra and the Arctic Ocean also form clear boundaries. Although the borderlands to the eastern and western edges are less clearly defined, Christian argues that it's helpful to think of Inner Eurasia as a single coherent unit based on geography. Its ecological poverty, which he discusses, and its pivotal geographical position has given Inner Eurasian history its distinctive shape, too. To survive, as he explains, Inner Eurasian societies developed distinctive ways of compensating for the region's low productivity. finding distinctive solutions to the challenges that their environment presented to them, rather. In the remainder of the article, Christian identifies 5 adaptations developed by inter-Eurasian societies that enabled them to make maximum use of the region's scarce resources. So what can I tell you about the sources and methodology here? Well, like other works by Christian, this article draws broadly from scholarship that is from across the West, Europe and the United States, as well as that of the former Soviet Union, to support his arguments, including bringing in historical analyses and insights from a variety of other disciplines, including anthropology, archaeology, geography, and so forth. This is very much a world historical kind of focus. The discussion he's having here is really sort of couched in a kind of global perspective. So let me give you a little bit of an outline here. Right. So in order to defend his proposition that inter-Eurasia constitutes a single coherent historical unit in world history, Christian offers at the beginning of the article 3 distinct arguments to support this: political argument, a geographical argument, and an ecological argument. And so as Christian explains, the ecology and the geography of inter-Eurasia have combined to give a distinctive shape to inter-Eurasian history from prehistory all the way to the present, by presenting unique challenges to the people who live there that require unique solutions that are different from the ones that are confronting the people who live in outer Eurasia. Addressing the political, Christian explains that among the first hints of an underlying coherence to inter-Eurasia is the fact that this region has periodically been unified politically within a single overarching empire, such as he identifies the First Turk Empire and its successors in the 6th century and following, the Mongol Empire in the 13th century and following, the Russian Empire in the 17th century following, and the Soviet Union in the 20th century. No other region in the world, by comparison, as Christian asserts, can boast a history of such huge empires. These regularities, this pattern suggests, so far as Christian is concerned, an underlying coherence to the region that differentiates it from the other parts of Eurasia, or the Afro-Eurasian landmass. So in terms of its physical geography, the region is dominated by the world's largest unified area of flatlands that have no formidable borders or barriers, right? Allowing for sufficient movement across the region for the development of close economic and political ties among the people who reside there. The absence of major barriers makes inter-Eurasia a natural unit, not only geographically, but also in terms of military history and political history as well, as a result of this sort of feature of it, that it is such a large and virtually featureless expanse of grasslands, of flatlands. In terms of its ecology, inter-Eurasia is a region that is differentiated from outer Eurasia by what he terms its continentality. This is a term other people use, and by that he really means there are kind of four characteristics about it. It's cold, it's high, it's flat, and it's dry. Right? He doesn't mention this in the article, but that's what he means by continentality, right? Cold, high, flat, and dry. And its northernness, right? Its northern latitudes together limit the region's agricultural productivity and potential. The consequence of these factors is that inter-Eurasia has continued to have a much smaller than average population density than the regions that constitute outer Eurasia. In spite of this, inter-Eurasia has not been relegated to a marginal role in human history, but has in fact played a pivotal role in the history of Eurasia and world history, for that matter. As Christian states on page 182, the political history of inter-Eurasia has shaped the rhythms not just of inter-Eurasia, but of the entire Eurasian world system. The combination of ecological poverty and the pivotal geographical position of inter-Eurasia has given the history of this region its distinctive shape. To survive, inter-Eurasian societies have found ways to compensate for the region's low productivity, finding distinctive solutions for the challenges that their environment has presented them with. In the rest of the article, Christian goes on to explain the 5 adaptations that developed in inter-Eurasian societies that enabled them to make maximum use of the region's scarce resources. These adaptations generated distinctive ways of life, distinctive economies, distinctive forms of politics, and distinctive views, right, outlooks. Focusing on these adaptations yields a clear periodization for inter-Asian history. As Christian asserts, these adaptations are as follows, and I'm going to talk about them once I've mentioned them to you here. So they are: first, hunting; second, pastoralism; third, nomadic pastoralism; 3, agrarian autocracy; and lastly, the Soviet command economy. Since only the first 3 of these fall within the sort of chronological period of our course, I'm going to concentrate primarily upon them in what remains of my discussion. So let's talk about these adaptations, right? So these are the adaptations that have allowed the people who have resided within Eurasia to maximize the potential in an environment that is very low in terms of its productivity, right? So the first adaptation was hunting, right? As Christian explains, Outer Eurasia was colonized much earlier than Inner Eurasia, which is definitely true. Outer Eurasia, our early hominid ancestors were able to survive as they had in Africa as foragers or hunter-gatherers. But in Inner Eurasia, where the scanty food energy was almost completely locked up in the grass, which is not suitable for human consumption, a technical revolution was necessary in order for human beings to live and exploit this environment for their survival. Hunting enabled early humans to exploit other animals and thereby support small human populations in this new environment. Right? So this first adaptation is the and the earliest adaptation is the one that he describes as I have mentioned here. So this adaptation continues on down to about 10,000 or so BCE, and it was at about that period of time that a second adaptation, pastoralism, begins to make its appearance and begins to become a feature of the lives of the people who live in Inner Eurasia. Right? So the emergence of agriculture in the Neolithic Revolution Neolithic period, shaped our entire species across the world, as our author explains, encouraging populations elsewhere to settle in permanent communities. In Inner Eurasia, the environmental pressures made sedentary farming-based agriculture difficult, if not entirely impossible. And so the same bias that we see in the earlier period towards the exploitation of animals with hunting continues on into this second period with pastoralism. With the so-called secondary products revolution, which he mentions, that developed around 4,000 or so BCE, pastoralism, the pasturing of animals, became the primary Neolithic technological adaptation that we see put into use in Inner Eurasia. This adaptation increased the resources that were available and increased the Inner Asian populations. But with it, there arose new challenges, namely the added presence of rival communities also intent on their own survival. Thus, Neolithic communities in Inner Eurasia had to find ways to mobilize those scarce resources to sustain themselves and to defend themselves from their supplies from their enemies. So this led to the emergence of horse cultures and chariot warfare within the period of pastoralism. So a third adaptation, nomadic pastoralism, is what followed. Early pastoralist societies were primarily sedentary, but pastoral nomadism, right, is an adaptation whereby pastoralists become fully nomadic. This development seems to have taken place towards the very end of the second millennium BCE and following. This may have been encouraged by the growing demand for horses among neighboring civilizations, as Professor Christian mentions. With the rise of chariot warfare and later cavalry warfare, empires needed horses for their armies, but lacking sufficient pasture lands within their own empires, they had to import horses from the steppe region or from Inner Eurasia. This marked the beginning of a symbiotic relationship between Inner and Outer Eurasia, with both members of an embryonic world system. As Christian notes, this symbiotic relationship has been an imbalanced one, which explains the tendency towards conflict between the zone and the steppe that has so characterized the interaction. The appearance of the adaptation of nomadic pastoralism led to the development of large nomadic armies that were able to support states on the steppe here in the period when nomadic pastoralism became the new adaptation, the primary adaptation. The mobility of the nomads gave nomadic pastoralists the ability to concentrate limited military forces and to form rudimentary states, which were mostly large tribal alliances, as he indicates. This development had important repercussions. It altered the main currents of migration that had been taking place over the millennia that preceded it. Prior to that point in time, there had been a sort of general flow from west to east, but beginning in this period with the adaptation of nomadic pastoralism, that direction changes and the flow of migration begins to be from east to west. Sorry about that. It also increased the scope and the scale of warfare, as he explains. The impact of this third adaptation would resonate all the way up until the end of the first millennium CE. The fourth adaptation that he talks about is agrarian autocracy, which occurred with the formation of the Kievan Rus and later the Russian Empire. Their more sophisticated and political organization, rather, and their ability to manage and deploy financial resources and other kinds of resources were the key to their success, eventually achieving demographic superiority over the steppes, which led to military superiority. Agrarian autocracy brought the agrarian state to the steppe during this period of the fourth adaptation. The fifth adaptation, the Soviet command economy, with the emergence of the capitalist societies, which brought productivity to new, previously unrealized levels in the course of the 19th and 20th century, changed the situation completely. Inner Eurasia, the adaptation that occurs here, this fifth adaptation, was a response to this changed situation. And it was in this that the Soviet command economy preserved elements of that autocracy, of the agrarian autocracy that we see in the fourth adaptation, to mobilize existing resources more effectively. As he explains, this worked for a time, at least until the resources began to decline, with it the end of the Soviet Union and the end of that adaptation. In fact, as he explains at the end of the article in this interesting section at the very last page, the end of Inner Eurasia as a distinctive unit of world history is really what these developments have brought us to. Right? As Christian explains, the technological changes of the 20th century have led to a situation now where the distinctiveness of Inner Eurasia's geography and ecology has declined. Right? It's no longer as distinctive and different as it once was. Both factors that had so characterized this region, its low productivity as well as its flatness, have lost their importance now that technology has changed productivity, and the whole world, at least for airplanes, is a one large flat surface. There are, as he states here, deeper reasons for treating Inner Eurasia as a distinctive unit of world history, or there were certainly, but these have now, at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century, now sort of lost their force, and we can assume that based on this situation in the future, it will cease to be a meaningful unit for describing developments as we head on into the further on into the 21st century. So what can I say, having that long kind of description of the article here, certainly say that this, in terms of its relevance, this is an article that is tremendously important for setting the scene for our class. Recognizing the distinctiveness of this region will help us to make sense of the interaction between the inhabitants of Inner Eurasia and the peoples of Outer Eurasia in the course of our course. Right? This article, I think, is a very important article. An article, although it is long and rich in detail, to the degree that sometimes it can be kind of almost overwhelming. Just rereading it once again, I took like 12 or 13 pages worth of notes, and I decided that I had to sort of trim them down. But nevertheless, I would say that it's very persuasive in the framework that it provides, and the broad use of sources, I think, really helps to support the thesis of the author's position. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. I wonder what your thoughts are on this article, and about how it connects to some of the other readings that we've been doing this week. So I appreciate your listening to me, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say on the discussion board. So